Hi, my name is Kevin Ballard. I am the Director of Software Validation here at MasterControl. Been with the company for 12 years, working again primarily on our validation products and software testing for our various releases. Today I'm going to talk about our MasterControl's validation and release strategy and how it can help our customers in their business processes. MasterControl is dedicated to minimizing our customers' validation and testing burdens so that they can focus on providing life-changing products to more people sooner. This is a really important point. Validation traditionally has been one of the larger tasks associated with an implementation, software adoption, and we want to minimize it so that customers can focus on the things that they're really good at. And we'll talk about how MasterControl is able to do that. First, let's talk a little bit about the validation requirements, where they've been, perceptions, things like that. Current practices and perceptions, generally in the industry, customers tend to wait for major releases or the first point release after a major release to upgrade. That's about every 2 to 3 years. So they'll wait 2 to 3 years before they upgrade. By the end of those 2 to 3 years, their software is really outdated. A lot of new features have been released, and it just takes a long time for them to upgrade. In the industry, typically they expect a large validation effort, both in resources, time, etc. And in fact, 10 years ago, even probably as close as 5 years ago, it wasn't unusual for them to expect to pay 3 times the cost of the software in validation and services. It was very expensive, very time-intensive effort. Validation still today tends to focus on blanket testing, meaning they test everything regardless of risk. They focus on non-value-added testing, testing areas that it wouldn't matter if they had problems or not. So based on all that, you can see that they still tend to focus on how to validate rather than why do they validate or what should they validate. Testing is still manual across the board. This means that it's slow, subject to human error, and there's a high need for correction. If you make a slight mistake, the expectation is that you're going to line through it, initial and date it. Very onerous processes surrounding manual execution. Some auditors in the past have been heard or quoted as saying they want to see the coffee stain on the paper. They want paper documents with paper signatures, and they want to see that coffee stain. Now, that quote is 10 to 15 years old, but a lot of validation effort is still under that, that concern, that statement that was made so long ago. And again, validation has extensive documentation requirements, and those are usually to compensate for human error. Admittedly, they're intended to help prevent the incidents of forging or bad records, but usually they end up just being there to compensate for little misprints, misspellings, things like that. What does the FDA actually require? Well, in 21 CFR Part 11, they say such procedures and controls to ensure the authenticity, integrity, and confidentiality of electronic records shall include the following: validation of systems to ensure accuracy, reliability, consistent intended performance, and the ability to discern invalid or altered records. So this is where the FDA requires validation, but the goal of it is to ensure that the software is going to work as we expect and that we can see if any records have been invalidated or altered. In their general principles of software validation, they say the level of validation effort should be commensurate with the risk posed by the automated operation. So here's where they introduce some of the risk-based approach to validation. There's other areas, the general principles of software validation that the FDA produced and other guidances go more in depth with validation. But to summarize, the FDA does require validation, but it's not prescriptive about how it should be done. They want to see that you've documented how you intend to validate, and then they want you to prove that you did validate it the way that you said you were going to. It doesn't have to be as heavy, as onerous as it traditionally is. So with that background, how does MasterControl validate? What do we recommend to our customers who are implementing or upgrading and validating? Again, in the general principles of software validation produced by the FDA, they recommend the least burdensome approach. Here they say, we believe we should consider the least burdensome approach in all areas of medical device regulation. I think that's a key phrase, and it goes on to explain a little bit more about that. But that's a key phrase. They want risk-based, making sure that we're focusing on the things that are the most critical to our business operations. In the industry, then, most vendors don't really talk about their validation effort just because of how difficult validation can be. Most vendors' validation is usually traditional and time-consuming, or if they've tried to do some innovation, it tends to be too light and insufficient, and it can definitely leave customers vulnerable. Regardless, validation often tends to be a blocker to implementation. It can be one of the most time-consuming activities that delays implementations and going live with new software. On the other hand, contrast that with us. We actually love to talk about our validation because, in my opinion, it's amazing. And it's very practical. With MasterControl, validation will be just a small part of your implementation. And we will continue to innovate and maximize the time that you're able to spend on your core business. And I'll explain how. MasterControl's validation approach involves 6 easy steps. First one is to stay current with smaller releases. As I mentioned earlier, most companies out there tend to wait 2 to 3 years between major releases before they upgrade. We believe that that increases the validation effort, and so by staying current with the smaller releases, you can minimize that effort. You should always conduct a vendor audit. You should always gain confidence in those you're purchasing and using software from. You should have robust change control in place in your company. You should always perform a risk assessment and identify your core business processes. One item that I think is critical to a validation approach is leveraging vendor work. A lot of validation duplicates what your vendors do. If you can leverage the vendor work and their documentation, you can save yourself significant time and effort in your validation implementation activities. And finally, the only testing really that you should be doing, if you're able to do these other 5 steps, is to perform critical business process tests. And it's like a PQ, but it's risk-based, and it's those processes that are critical to your business. And we're going to go over each of these 6 steps here. Number 1, staying current with smaller releases. Why would that be good? You might think, well, if I upgrade more often, I'm going to end up with a lot more effort. Well, no, actually you're not. Smaller releases have fewer code changes. Because there's fewer code changes, and actually the level of testing that goes into them is higher, those code releases are more stable. If you have a small number of issues that have changed, your risk assessment is going to be smaller. So your effort to produce a risk assessment is going to be less. And as a result, it's going to take less time to validate, less time to actually execute the validation, less drain on your company resources to perform the validation. Here at MasterControl, we've been issuing point releases, for example 10.1.5 and 10.1.6, on a regular basis every 2 months. Those MasterControl customers who are already adopting those point releases on a regular basis are already staying current with their smaller releases. With version 11, we're moving to a 3-month release cycle, and all we're doing with those is just adding a controlled number of enhancements to the process. So they will look a lot like the point releases, but with a few focused enhancements that will be beneficial to our customers. And so again, small number of changes, small number of enhancements will make your testing and implementation activities much easier and simpler. Number 2, conduct a vendor audit. We recommend that all customers audit us. We have various levels of audits. You can do what's called a postal audit, which is a questionnaire, and then we host 1 or 2 day on-site audits. We really like our customers to come and see our processes, see our site, see our facilities, and gain confidence in what we do. It increases confidence between the vendor and the customer. It increases your confidence, our customers' confidence in the software. And most importantly, it establishes a working relationship between the two companies so that there's a real good, healthy back and forth between us. 3, for our customers, they should establish a robust change control process. And this should be part of any software implementation. What change control does is it helps you manage your system, manage changes to your system. It lets you plan for and efficiently execute software upgrades and validation activities. If you have a robust change control process, then software upgrades become part of that. Validation becomes part of that rather than being its own entity. It's just a subset of change control. And as such, validation becomes much more manageable, much more defined, much more limited and appropriate for the activities that you have. 4th, with any upgrade, you should perform a risk assessment. You should evaluate the changes that are in the software, compare them to your critical business processes, and then assess the testing that needs to be done. MasterControl, with our releases, starting with version 11, we provide a risk assessment with our releases that will help you as a starting point for your risk assessment activities. The release notes are also there. They list each change to the software in very manageable sections to help your risk assessment be much easier. All of this facilitates risk-based testing, which is what we should be doing. 5, leveraging vendor work. I've actually split this into 2 sections. 5A is about the TOQ. So traditionally, the operational qualification or the OQ portion of validation has been the longest test activity in any implementation. I know here at MasterControl, we validate our software before we release it. That effort takes us at least 35 man-weeks for the full suite validation. It takes a lot of time, a lot of resources, a lot of coordination. What we do is we package that validation effort into what we call a TOQ, or a transfer OQ. And then we offer that to customers who can then adopt that documentation for their own validation records. TOQ significantly reduces our customers' test time and boils it down to just evaluating it and accepting it. The TOQ includes the installation qualification that you get from tech support, the OQ documents, the functional requirement specifications, and the trace matrices that show the traceability between the requirements and the tests. Second part of this, and this is fairly new, so I want to emphasize it, is ATOQ. This means Automated Transfer OQ. What this is with the release of version 11, we've automated our validation effort. And so that manual effort that I said took at least 35 man-weeks for MasterControl, now that we've automated it, it takes only 2 man-weeks. It's a significant time savings, significant improvement over previous validation methods for MasterControl. It results in cleaner documentation, and I'm going to show an example here. This is an example of an ATOQ report. As you can see, it's very clean. There's no handwriting in here, no line throughs, initial and date. There's no smudges, no coffee stains on the paper. This is all electronic. What you'll get is screenshots right in line with the test scripts. If there were any execution notes or deviations where the automation test failed, or where there's a software defect, you would see that in line with the comments, the root cause analysis, and the plan going forward. You can see that all the passes are typed in, very clean and legible. And in addition to that, there's a video timestamp. So you can see for each step, there's a timestamp there. there's a video that accompanies every execution, and you can go to that timestamp in the video and watch the automation as it actually executes the tests. Very clean, high level of objective evidence, beautiful, really easy to adopt and accept, evaluate for risk assessment and accept for your own documentation. As I said, cleaner documentation, this eliminates user error. Easier to review and analyze, and full objective evidence in the form of inline screenshots, execution notes, and video. We're really, really excited about this product, and we think it'll be a great benefit to our customers. The last step, and this is really where the majority of the customer time for implementations and validation should occur, is with core business process testing. Now, traditionally we use the term PQ, or performance qualification. I like using CBP, or critical business process testing. The reason is it emphasizes the risk-based approach to this validation activity. What CBP does is it tests the processes that are critical to your business operations, that could affect data integrity, and that could have an impact on patient health. And so you'll remember back on step 2, it said identify your critical business processes. Customers should go through and see which of their processes that they use MasterControl for are critical to their business, could affect data integrity, or could affect patient health. Once they've identified those, then they can create test scripts based on those. They can use the MasterControl user requirements specification as a starting point, but not everything in that URS needs to be tested. What may be critical for one customer may not be critical for the next. It's very customer based, but it is limited on the risk. The reason I say this is where the majority of the customer effort should be, if you look at all the 6 steps together, most of that work is preparatory. That's done before you purchase and implement, or before you implement MasterControl, probably post-purchase. And the only thing that you would really need to do on a repetitive basis is evaluate the next release, do a risk assessment, and then perform your critical business process tests. And only those tests that are affected by the changes in the software. Really, we estimate that if it's critical testing and done regularly with the point releases, the testing effort should be very small, on the order of 1 to 5 days, depending on how robust your use of MasterControl is. And so this is where it would be, your effort would be, but it would be actually very small because of the risk-based approach. So to summarize, we have 6 basic steps to how our customers should implement and validate MasterControl software. Again, a lot of this is preparatory. Implementing smaller releases, staying current. Every 3 months, just doing a little upgrade. Conducting a vendor audit before you purchase, or if it's been a few years before you've audited us, come on out. Check out our processes and procedures. See what we do. Make sure you have a robust change control. With every release, perform a risk assessment, adopt our ATOQ, and then do very limited critical business process testing that's limited to the higher risk areas of MasterControl. So we believe that by following these 6 simple steps, our customers can more quickly and efficiently adopt the latest MasterControl software, validate it, and focus the rest of their efforts and time on making their life-changing products available to more people sooner. Rather than having to go through the traditional time-intensive, resource-intensive validation methodology, they're able to use our innovative release and validation practices to focus on their critical business processes. We're really excited about this. We love to talk about validation. And that's it. Thank you very much.